Other forms of communication that we should go over include kinesics, proxemics, and haptics. Kinesics is a system of noting and analyzing posture, facial expressions, body motions, and these convey meaning. If I were to perform this motion or posture, what am I displaying? Possibly doubt. If I were to bite my lip, possibly doubt. This is an emotion. This is kinesics, noting posture and body language, right? They also indicate gender markers. You know, if you ever go into a bar and somebody across the bar gives you the eye, you know, what is that conveying, right? It's conveying a message. You know? In going back to our gender marker expression, if I were to go and, you know, raise my eyebrows like this and, how you doing? How you doing? Right? It's conveying a message. In Japan, eyebrow flashing is suppressed. It's considered indecent. So again, body language and posture sends a message. It's a language, right? If I were to do this in our language, in our society, that would convey no. If I were to shake my head like this is a gesture for yes. In other countries, like Sri Lanka, this is yes in Sri Lanka, right? Tilting your head back like this and looking up is no in other like cultures like Sri Lanka or in Greece, right? So again, gestures convey a meaning and a message. Haptics is the study of touch. A lot of information can be communicated through touch. Proxemics is the study of space. The use of space conveys a message and a meaning. This is really important when you do your own ethnographies, is to look at the distance between members in a ritual. That gives you a lot of information about how we as a society use space and what does it convey. In our society, we generally give about 2 feet of distance around each other. That's our personal space. It conveys a message. Why do we do that? There's a meaning behind that. In other countries, especially in Middle Eastern countries, where it's impolite to engage in a conversation when you're not in a certain amount of space that you can smell the other person, right? Being able to be closer is a form of respect, and the shrinking of space conveys a message, intimacy, right? Let's go over some other definitions. Paralanguage. Paralanguage is the extra-linguistical noises that accompany language, such as crying and laughing. So these convey information. They're often difficult to distinguish between language and paralanguage. There are some structural descriptive terms that we should go over that deal with a speaker's vocalizations. I'm just going to run them down. You don't need to know them for any kind of exam or quiz, and they're certainly talked about in detail in your book. But those include pitch. The pitch range is if it's high or low. Lip control, if it's open or controlled or closed. Glottal control, which is the sharp to smooth transitions in pitch. Articulation control, forced or relaxed speech. Hopefully in my lectures I'm not forcing articulation control, I'm more relaxed. Rhythm control, whether it's a smooth or jerking setting of vocal activity, which I just performed just now, this jerky rhythm. Resonance, from thin to resonant, right? Tempo, if it increases or decreases from the norm. These all indicate a state of being, right? A state of being, indicate a state of being, apart from what is being said. For example, and I haven't had a few drinks yet, but if I were to walk into the lecture and say, it's good to be here, right? That would indicate a state of being. But if I were to walk in another time and say, it's good to be here, right? There's a difference in my emotional state, right? There's a message being sent. There's information being sent here. So the first example, good to be here, I may be a little hammered. And the other one, it's good to be here. I might have, I'll be fully conscious and alert, right? And these are examples of how just changing lip control, resonance, tempo changes the meaning of what is being said, right? Let's talk about social linguistics. We're moving from descriptive structural linguistics into social linguistics, which is the study of language in our society, right? The first definition we probably should go over is language families. A language family is a group of languages descended from a single ancestral language. As we know, English is one of the groups of languages in the Germanic subgroup of the Indo-European family. Right? So, determining the origins of a language is important to social linguists. I'm more interested in other things, but we'll define some more here. Glottochronology then is the method for dating the divergence in the branches of a language family. Read this in your book. You'll get a better understanding of glottochronology and language families. And be familiar with it because it'll appear on a midterm. Know what the definition of core vocabulary is. The core vocabulary in a language is pronouns, lower numerals, and names for body parts and natural objects. These core vocabularies, these are important characteristics of a language because they generally don't change. How often do numbers change from language to language? Not very often, right? How often does the term for bird change, right? If you were to say, hey, what is that creature right there? In any language, they'll probably say that's some sort of bird, right? So natural objects, pronouns, lower numerals, and names for body parts. How often does that, like this is a hand. No, it's a foot. No, it doesn't change. This is a hand, right? In any other language, this body part here is what we're referring to. So again, body parts, animals, nature, natural objects are unlikely to change in languages. In language families, right? So that we use these as a measure of core vocabulary. We could date changes in the language. For example, when technology changes, these are excellent moments to note changes in core vocabularies. In the English language, a computer, you're all familiar with computers, is an electronic device for, a number of different things. But in German, what is the German word for computer? Well, it's computer, because they adopted the use of the word into their own vocabulary. So again, we can see this change, and we know that computers were built at a certain period in time, 1960s, 1970s, and that we can date this change in language as this term and this technology is incorporated into other languages. So again, this is a form of glottochronology where we look at changes in language to date divergence. All right. Other examples of glottochronology, 40 years ago in our society, how often would we use the term salsa or sushi? So we know that the incorporation of food from other cultures into ours changes our lexicon and changes our language. We incorporate other foodstuffs into our language and then thus adopting some of the language there. Right? The study of language and culture is called ethnolinguistics. It's the study of the relationship between language and culture. For example, I'm going to give you some examples of language and culture. Let me take a pause here. I'm going to erase this board here and put up some terms. All right, again, ethnolinguistics is the study of relationships between language and culture. What we're looking for is how human behavior and language interact. Okay, we're going to look at some kinship terms. We're going to go over kinship terms in more detail when we talk about kinship a few lectures from now. But it's important to note that we have certain terms to reflect certain behaviors or or we use kinship terms to describe our relationship to one another. Okay, here's some examples of language and ethnolinguistics. Right, the difference between a mother and a father. There's a difference there. It's gender, but it's also the relationship that you have in relationship to who your mother is or your father. There's a difference between a mother and a daughter in our language. Right? A daughter is a what relationship to a mother? A daughter and a brother have a different relationship, or a sister and a brother have a different relationship, and there's different behavior between a sister and a brother. Okay. What's the difference between a father-in-law, and a stepfather? Is there behavior associated with a father-in-law, and a stepfather? Is there a relationship difference between a father, a stepfather, and a father-in-law? This is the study of ethnolinguistics, the study of language and behavior. Okay. There's a difference between language and gender. Is our language sexist? Well, let's think about that for a second. If I were to put the term widow and widower, what's the difference between a widow and a widower? If I were to say Henry is Sally's widower, how do I say the opposite of that? Is there connotations of power and image in regards to some of the terms that we described? What's the difference between a sir and a madam, or a master and a mistress, or a wizard and a witch? In our language, do we have evidence and discrepancies in power when we think about these terms? Let's look at some modern examples of language, gender, and human behavior. How many words do we have there that are derogatory towards women? You don't have to just think about that. Then think about how many terms we have that are derogatory towards men. Is there a discrepancy in the different numbers there? Well, maybe there's an imbalance then of power in our society. And we have these terms that illustrate this imbalance of power. All right. We don't have to talk about this imbalance between language and gender, but we can also see how dialects and other uses of language show discrepancies in society through social class, right? When we talk about dialects are varying forms of a language that reflect regions or social class. So a dialect is a varying form of language that reflects regions or social classes that are similar enough to be mutually understandable. Right? If I were to say to you, let's go play billiards, or let's go shoot pool, it's the same game essentially. It just reflects social class, right? What group plays billiards? What group shoots pool? It's a difference in social class. So our definition then of social linguistics is the study of the structure and use of a language as it relates to social settings. That's what a social linguistics studies. I think that's all I want to cover in human communication and language. There are accompanying reading assignments that we'll discuss in another video, and I'll ask some questions. The one reading is Deborah Tannen's Report Talk. Read that. Make sure that you read the chapter in Human Communication and Language. These terms that we covered in this video are important for midterms and examinations. So make sure that you keep up with the reading, that you do the reading assignments, and I'll see you in the next lecture.